Hi everybody, this is Hero from the Birds back with another Shadowlands video, and in this video I'd like to look at a +8 the other side from the perspective of a Holy Paladin, and specifically today we're looking at a Holy Paladin with a great deal of mastery. What do you do when you have really low haste, so here I have 14% haste, and really high mastery in a dungeon setting on Fortified? Coupled together with that two other pieces I've added. I'm playing Venthyr, and I'm playing with Inflorescence, the legendary that gives our infusion a buff to Holy Light. So we're essentially doing a lot of kind of ranged Holy Light type of Paladin gameplay in a dungeon on a Fortified week. So a lot of strikes against the usual way we think about playing Holy Paladin. And to top it off, I have added on the following talent setup. So you can see we're making use of Light's Hammer. We're doing things like Saved by the Light with Beacon of Virtue, and we're not playing with any other tools like Holy Avenger or Sanctified Wrath. So I'm going to kind of walk through my thoughts as I watch back this replay. I think about the different kinds of gameplay choices that are being made, and what maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages are. That poor guy went flying off the edge there. So the one thing I would note is for weeks where melee suffers, so weeks with, the fixate affix that you need to jump out of melee for, weeks like Quaking, I suppose, is partly that if you have a lot of melee in your group. And perhaps also the storming, where you have the winds that are blowing around. Melee classes like Holy Paladin are going to suffer a little bit, or if you're trying to play Mistweaver by fist weaving, you're going to have a bit of a difficult time in general. So there's some advantage to playing a more ranged style, or at least having tools that you can make use of from ranged, and you'll see a little bit later in this video me showcasing a couple of instances where it can be kind of helpful. I'd say it's also nice to have a kind of ranged option, or the ability to move out of melee when you're playing with pugs, because you're never quite sure what kind of decision they're going to make, if they're going to interrupt things, if you're going to have problems with aggro or CC. So being able to kite while still doing some of your job, or at least jump out of your melee duties from Crusader's Might and Holy Shock, that can be a helpful thing. What the build revolves around is trying to be in melee if you can, and then when that's not possible, you want to use your infusion procs alongside your Holy Light casts and Beacon of Virtue to top the entire group. So here we use Ashen Hallow halfway through this haul, and Ashen Hallow also works really well with Beacon of Virtue. Here was sort of wasted because we ended up kiting these mobs away. That's okay, just and use the tools aggressively if you can. This is kind of a statement that's true for all kinds of Holy Paladin play. Don't hold your CDs. Try to use them, because you never know. You never know when you're going to run into trouble on a pug, and it's just better to have used it than for someone to die. There we just saw a quintessential moment where Saved by the Light actually saved somebody's life. You can see 2 members there, 3 members there with the Saved by the Light debuff from that pull. And I think there was evidence that one individual, okay, he just got sawed in half by a fixate, but that's okay, or whirlwind. But where one individual was at one health, and then Saved by the Light procced and saved his life. Kind of fun. It actually really works nicely as a passive option to tie together with Virtue. And I would really recommend it, not just if you're playing a Holy Light style, but in general if you're playing Mythic Plus Dungeons with Virtue. The reason for that is Judgment Light is fine, and it'll do okay throughput, but Saved by the Light is a nice just button that will save people's life. It makes casting your Beacon of Virtue that much better, because the throughput is quite a lot of healing. Overall, guys, the dungeons are obviously going to be easier on a Fortified week, and we can put to use a lot of the same tools we normally take advantage of as a Holy Paladin. Things like our Hammer of Wrath, offensive Holy Shocks, Judgment, those kinds of pieces. And the bosses aren't really that big of a deal. So mostly it's about trash, but I just want to comment a little bit about the use of virtue as we move through this dungeon, and just explain that I think it's a really strong ability that gets overlooked largely because people have some weird attitude towards the difference between it and Glimmer as far as damage profile is concerned and throughput. So on the damage side, the argument goes that Glimmer adds damage because the actual Glimmer will proc on the enemy that you're fighting. And so you're producing more damage because you're firing at least some of your holy shocks into the bosses or into the mobs. And that's true. But the circumstances under which you do that are a lot more limited than perhaps first meets the eye. For example, if you need to holy shock one of your allies, like a friendly person, you're going to have the problem of not casting holy shock offensively. So that's the one way in which that will commonly disrupt the damage profile of holy shock. The second thing is, even if you do holy shock, it takes 2 holy shocks in a row before you get the Glimmer value. Now you can spread them around. You can holy shock one, Crusader Strike, holy shock another mob, Crusader Strike, and you will get value to that. So there is more damage, technically speaking, behind Glimmer of Light in the absolute. But what never really gets calculated is how many GCDs it's required of you to bring up your entire group. So you can see here my group's getting kind of injured. How many CDs would it take if all of my group got chunked to 50% health? And say whether or not I had access to wings or a mini wings, whether or not I had Holy Avenger running, it's going to take at least 3 and maybe 4 global cooldowns to top everybody. And this is true especially as you get higher and higher in dungeons and you start doing 15s. That kind of a thing where people get chunked for quite a lot. And whenever they get hit, they're really in danger right away. That's what makes Glimmer a little bit awkward, because you still have the basic rotation of having to use 3 or 4 globals in a row in order to be effective. And what Virtue actually offers you is a little bit more uptime on damage. Now this build in particular is not really suited for that. We're doing tons of mastery, and the reason I'm showing you this largely is to show you that you can perform in a +8 pretty well, even with really horrible stats or stats that are not considered very good for Mythic Plus. With no haste, with a Holy Light build, you can still get the job done. But on the Virtue side, when you can top the entire group in 2 GCDs, or if you're Kyrian, I think I took a break here to take a phone call, and you can, Virtue and Divine Toll, some combination of Virtue, Word of Glory, Holy Shock, bringing everybody back up in a couple of GCDs. What that ultimately means is that you can have more time to do the thing you want. Damage. So if you're playing Crusader's Might, or if you're playing a kind of melee version of Holy Paladin, and you take Beacon of Virtue, you can be assured that every time you press Virtue, you will top the group and it will let you go right back to doing damage. And this is perhaps one thing that I find so curious when people talk about the differences between Glimmer and Beacon of Virtue. That's on the damage side. But on the throughput side, it's even more pronounced. The throughput of Virtue is off the charts when you need it. The throughput of Glimmer is gradual. It's over the course of a whole long extended fight. And in my experience, guys, Mythic Plus is a lot closer to PvP than raids when it comes to healer's responsibility to top people. You can see here a great example of where Virtue shines in a place that Glimmer would have difficulty alongside Inflorescence. In 2 GCDs, we top everyone, then they're injured again. Well, Glimmer, guys, forces you to really rely on your Holy Shock to do any throughput healing and to top people off. More than that, it tops people off in a slower manner over the course of a longer period. In essence, what Virtue offers is a really speedy recovery. So it increases the speed at which you can recover your entire team's health pool And that can be really important when you start looking at high prideful, where Glimmer might do okay throughput, but you're going to cause far more often your teammates to have to use a bunch of CDs to survive. Now, really good groups are going to make use of that, and it's going to be completely fine. But what happens if someone makes a mistake? This is the big thing I keep coming back to. A lot of the times what people get told is that if someone makes a mistake, it's just on them. And you know what? They screwed up. They should just learn better and not make that mistake. They shouldn't stand in bad. And while that's true, what Virtue essentially lets you do is compress your healing and your throughput into a smaller window for everybody. And that ability to compress is available all the time. And it matches up really nicely with 5 people in a group, because you can Virtue and then you can heal the other person who doesn't have the buff, and everybody's topped right away. If someone makes a mistake and that causes you to move your focus away from healing your tank in a really hectic plus 15, Virtue is this one button that you press on your tank. You go and deal with the other person. It's just like they have a normal beacon. If anyone else screws up in that window of time, they're immediately topped as well. It just does such a better job of covering as far as throughput is concerned. So those two sides, I guess the comparison between Glimmer and Virtue as far as the damage output that you can produce and the kind of throughput you can do as a healing. People talk about the loss of the beacon, for example, in the tank. I think are largely red herrings. The fact that you don't have a constant beacon on your tank is kind of irrelevant if you have access to 4 beacons every 8 seconds on your entire party. If you are only healing your tank, beacon is insignificant. If you're in the middle of healing your tank and someone else takes damage, Glimmer is not going to give you very many options for helping that person out while you help your tank. Say 3 people take damage. What do? You have to slowly work your way back up, and often you see people making tough choices about who they're going to heal. You can see here, we're kind of in trouble. What do? What kind of CD will help us get back into this? Everyone had to use their personals there. You had the druid use his personal. You had the hunter use his personal. You had the feral use his personal. There's no chance that they have those available now. So what do? Well, that's partly what Virtue's here for, as an emergency button. You don't always have to get full value out of it, but it will save so many more people because you have that beacon constantly on far more party members than just having one beacon on the tank, who often is sustaining themselves and who you are often focusing with your heals anyways, rendering the normal beacon kind of useless. Now, I say that, of course, from the perspective of somebody who's running a build that's really awkward in Mythic Plus in general. Why run a build with 44% mastery and 14% haste? It's bad. And the answer is yes. I think it is kind of bad. Just like I'm bad running through this portion of the dungeon. Look at me, I'm getting nervous. I can't even make it through without getting hit. Yeah, one more time, just for fun. It's bad, and I think that's part of the reason why I also wanted to show you this video. It's really nice for people to see what doesn't work so they can take account for it, and they can actually see evidence that it's even a person who's mildly skilled at the game and can make it work still is recommending to you, this is going to feel awkward, this is going to feel a little clunky. If you like the ranged Holy Paladin build, that's fine, but you really need haste. Stacking mastery is going to be a tough time overall as you push these keys. And the reasons become somewhat apparent, and I'll mention them here. You can see my Holy Light cast time is quite slow. That means I'm going to get to people late who are injured. I'm the only one here as the healer, so it's sort of my responsibility to watch them. Also, mastery is somewhat dubious in dungeons because sometimes you can be right beside people, but sometimes you're going to get pushed out of melee and be pretty far away. It's not that the Holy Light build itself is bad or that Virtue is bad. It's that playing this with only 14% haste and 44% mastery is going to make it that much more difficult. So I want you guys to see that and be aware that though it can be done, I would recommend, if you're going to play Holy Light especially, play with a lot more crit. You can play with more verse. You certainly want to play with more haste. It will make your virtue windows that much cleaner. You're not going to lose that much value on your mastery because it's variable. Here we have an interesting portion of the dungeon where I'm trying to hold my Ashen Hallow for the boss, so we can pair it together with wings to kill the boss. And it's probably an example of a pug gone wrong, meaning I don't know if these individuals intended to do the pull this way, but largely in the groups I've run, for 4 to 5, we'd bring everything down right here to this urn. We'd freeze it all, Ashen Hallow here, and then you would do a similar pull, bypassing the dragon, not running into the extra pieces. But pugs are a fun world, and sometimes extra stuff gets pulled. People don't walk in the right spot always. Sometimes I don't. And then when you're backpedaling, sometimes you grab more stuff. So it's nice to just feature a piece where people are screwing things up and you can see how folks react to that. Another reason why I like Virtue, especially if you're not Kyrian, not having access to a kind of burst, oh crap moment button, means that relying on Virtue to get you out of these situations can be a godsend. Here the tank is the only one who's taken damage, but we're likely going to press Virtue anyways, as you can see I did there. And why did I do that? Because I anticipated with this large of a pull, it's likely that somebody else is going to mess up. Here I get locked out. But I Virtue even though my tank's the only one taking damage. And that's because it's worth the GCD with Saved by the Light in case he dips below. And if anyone else in that moment gets injured or takes aggro or has a problem, I know that the Virtue is going to be there to save them. That's what I love about this spell. It's the preemptive nature of it, actually. It's not the reactiveness. It's knowing that you can press this button to get everybody beacon, so in case someone else screws up, things are okay. Anyways, we make it through that part. It's going okay. I think we only have a couple of deaths from the earlier portions, which I think personally are the harder portions of the other side. That and getting through the little puzzles where the white fire comes down and kills you. Just slowly work our way down. Again, you don't have to cast Holy Lights even though you're a Holy Light build. All of your other stuff's going to do fine, and your Beacon of Virtue is there to help you. Now we can use our wings together with our Ashen Hallow. So we just open here, get it down, go through wings, prioritize our Hammer of Wrath, and just go to town. I also like Virtue when we're playing on the final boss. Uzala gives that really bizarre debuff that moves you away from melee to the back of the room, generally speaking, to drop it off. There's a lot of awkward movement in the final fight, and it's just nice to have this button to pay attention to. Now, another reason I would not recommend going heavy mastery is not because of slow Holy Light casts. You are going to have less damage added to the group if you're doing a Holy Light build, but I don't think that's that significant, guys. The difference between getting a +2 and +3 in like 10 to 15 keys is not going to be because of healer damage, though it's nice to have it. It will be largely because people die or people screw up. So in all of the push keys, there's always like 10 or 15 deaths, and I ask myself frequently, in these push keys, what if these 10 people did not die? What would have helped them to live? And for Holy Paladin off, the answer I come back to is, well, if we'd played with Virtue instead of Glimmer, I think we would have had more tools to help these people keep going. 10 less deaths is like a lot of time, right? But 50 seconds off your timer, that's well worth the kind of damage output that you're going to throw into a dungeon. So if you're not playing Holy Light, the key things you want to be looking at, of course, is Consecration, Judgment, and Hammer of Wrath as much as possible. And you can do that even if you're playing the Holy Light build getting into melee. But for those of you who really are tired of Glimmer, guys, look, it's absolutely fine. We're in a +8 here. We got basically 200 eye level gear. We're playing in a pug. We're playing with heavy mastery, so no haste at all. And we're not having any significant problems. We've got emergency tools, even though we're playing with Venthyr. We have a button that allows us to essentially top everybody off in a few GCDs. It's a good time. I could have put my Ashen Hallow down here. I just saved it for the portal because I wasn't sure how much damage the tank did. And I just thought, let's make sure that we're not the ones that cause us to two-phase this. You can see we have 6.5 minutes left anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. But that's the basics of the dungeon, guys. Again, mostly I wanted to show this to let you know if you're playing a Holy Light build that has a crap load of mastery and you can't get rid of it at the moment due to eye level, or you have no haste, don't sweat it. You can still perform fine in dungeons. You can still perform fine in pugs. I wouldn't recommend it. I'd recommend really continuing to move toward haste as much as possible. But nevertheless, hope you guys enjoyed this run through, and we will catch you again next time.